Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Climate and Water Initiative's Water Cooler Conversations. My name is Mohammed Mahmoud. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at CWI. And today we're joined with a good friend and guest, all the way from Philadelphia, Abby Sullivan, who is currently the Chief Resilience Officer with the City of Philadelphia's Office of Sustainability. Abby, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Before we jumped on, I was looking back and doing the math of how long we knew each other, and I think we're approaching 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. And just for context, our first interactions really came when we were both in an organization called the Water Utility Climate Alliance. At the time, I was with Central Arizona Project, representing Arizona in the alliance, and you were with Philadelphia Water Department, if I'm not mistaken. A little bit of history. I know we'll touch on WUCA, Water Utility Climate Alliance, a little bit later. One of the interesting things I recall is we were at a crossroads at WUCA where we were looking to expand the alliance, and you, as in the larger you, Philadelphia Water Department, as
Yeah.
well as Austin Water, right? If I'm
Mhm.
Austin Water were our new expansion teams, if you will, into the alliance, and it took us a little while to get it done, but one of the things I strongly recall is just sort of your very active role in the alliance and just inserting a lot of new blood and a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, which things I've learned to associate with you moving onwards. But I just want to give you a chance to sort of reflect on those early days before we, dive into a little bit later in our conversation.
Yeah. Boy, Wuka. Wuka will always have a very special place in my heart because I think if you work in the adaptation space, or at least this is how it felt at the water department, we had to sort of be knowledgeable in all areas of the water utility. We're a drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater utility. So you had to know enough. You had to be kind of a generalist and really understand the systems and everything about it. But the work we were doing was very technical and very much about the climate science and risk and how you sort of understand that risk. And so there was nobody else in the department really doing what we were doing. And I'll credit, my manager, Julia Rockwell, is phenomenal. And we had a great, very small, but great little team. And we reached out to WUCA, I think, with interest in joining, not realizing how exclusive and like what an incredible group of utilities it was. And shortly after that, I think you all agreed like that we could go through the process of joining. And it just was such a gift because suddenly we're with all these people that are in the same position as us that have to know all about the water utility and the systems, but your role at the utility is very, very specific and really very focused on the climate science and sort of, how do you make decisions under deep uncertainty? And it was like, oh, I found my people. And we could just sort of nerd out and talk about all the specifics related to that world. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, I look back on that time fondly. I'm about to go off script. I had this linearly planned on my head, but
Uh-huh.
I feel like we're already touching the VUCA thing, and one of the things you're right, I completely agree on is, each agency that was part or organization that was part of WUCA had their own unique challenges when it came to how they addressed or incorporated climate or climate change or adaptation primarily in their work. Obviously, some utilities were a little bit more progressive in that department, and so they sort of had a little bit of a step ahead. Others were not so much, and I'll gladly say my former agency was not in that camp. I'd like to think I did I did some impact to
Yeah.
to do that later with the help of WUCA, because I think what the
Mhm.
organization did is allowed us to, I mean, learn from each other, which was one of our products, right? Learning from
Yep.
each other. But really, it allowed folks to see what other utilities are doing in terms of this issue of how do you incorporate climate science and data and planning into water resource management. Because at the end of the day, we were all essentially water providers of different scales and capacities. And so it was really a great opportunity to learn from each other. One of the interesting things, I guess, behind the scenes, it took us a long time to reach a decision to expand the alliance. I know it felt probably forever from your end, looking back. But it took us a long time to decide to expand by how much, right? And I think we went sort of conservatively and steady in terms of just adding two utilities. It also took a long time for us to figure out who those utilities were. And I do remember that you all had approached, right, not knowing the mechanisms behind the scene. You guys, and certainly Austin Water, just injected a lot of new blood to the organization. Not to say that we were stagnant, but we really energized the organization. We got really excited. And of course, the team at the time, yourself and Julia, and I think Sebastian, of course, your GM representative, Mark, at the time. I mean,
So,
just
yeah,
lovely group of people. And,
thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, I miss them. I mean, luckily I still get to work with them a lot, but yeah, I think another really special thing about WUCA is the in-person, annual meetings and the general manager meetings. And I think it changed from feeling like I think initially they were like, we have to like join this organization and there's commitments and payments and do we really want to do this? And I think it switched very quickly into being like, wow, this is like such a thing to be proud of that we're part of this amazing group of utilities that are sort of leading in the space. And I think it really became like a feather in the cap instead of being like this burden. And it was so valuable to learn from everyone. And I think you're right. Like, your utility is dealing with drought and very, very different
Mhm.
climate impacts than we're facing. But I think just still learning from each other on how you think about uncertainty, how you use the climate information, how you deal with, you know, probabilistic projections
Mhm.
versus, yeah, just how do you really take action in the space? And I think yeah, it was just such a delight to work with everybody. And yeah, I miss it so much.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, delving too much into memory lane. I'm getting
Yeah.
nostalgic myself. But, part of it is also a testament of not just the mission being important, but also just to your point, having the right people in the room, and not right as in, right in the literal sense, but just if everyone's on board and just everyone is sort of putting the group effort ahead, it just makes everything so easy. I'm sure
Yeah.
you've been in organizations or group efforts where personalities really drove collaboration in
Yeah.
completely different direction.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
No, I still think so many, I mean, if not everyone in the group has been like a real mentor in my life in certain ways. I mean, being connected to David Bihar has just been so valuable, like thinking about coastal resilience, having the opportunity to chair a working group. Like everybody is just so phenomenal and incredible. And I truly feel like I could still reach out to any of them for a question and they would give me the time, to give a thoughtful answer and connect. And yeah, it's been really wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Well, let's extrapolate from that, and there's a couple of directions I want to go. One, you kind of touched on it, so you're giving me too many options to go here. So I'm gonna go down a path and maybe retrack. One of the biggest, I think, your contributions during the time of WUCA, and you just hinted on it, is the work related to sea level rise and coastal resilience. And if I remember correctly. You were the chair lead of the major subcommittee that we had in WUCA that looked at advancing these issues related to coastal resilience and sea level rise. Talk to me a little bit more about sort of A, your interest. I mean, obviously, at that point in time, Philadelphia, and still Philadelphia is
Yeah.
vulnerable to those risks. But just
Mhm.
sort of the work that you did and what are the challenges you saw, the potential contributions? Just talk to me a little bit more about what that work really entailed.
I mean, again, I think I was really thankful to Julia and to the organization for being open to forming a sea level rise committee. And I think selfishly, I just knew I had a lot to learn from everybody else. And I don't know if this resonates with you, but I feel like when I started really diving into doing climate adaptation work and resilience work, and we'll get to this later probably, but
Mm.
up until that point in my career, I think I had enjoyed jobs and tasks, but I feel like I really found my calling when suddenly I was sort of leading the coastal resilience work. And I think, it takes a certain type of person, but I just became almost borderline obsessed with sort of understanding sea level rise, all the things that go into it, like the way, the lunar cycle influences tides and
Mm.
all the different local elements that go into whether you're vulnerable or not, or whether your sea level rise rates are faster or slower than somewhere else in the world. The way that Earth's tectonic plates are shifting and moving from the last ice age and how that impacts everything. So I just found it endlessly fascinating, but knew I had so much to learn. I mean, I was pretty green when I started out, like when I joined WUCA. And so I really wanted this opportunity to have deeper discussions and to learn from everybody else. So, yeah, I feel very fortunate that folks were interested in having the working group and or the committee, and I learned so much from colleagues that participated in that. And I think the sea level rise field has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And so it's been really kind of cool to see these shifts. And I mean, it's challenging too, right? As the science changes. I think the range of projections we were planning with when I started in WUCA, it was like, 1 foot by the end of the century to over 11 feet. Like the uncertainty was just insane. Like,
Yeah.
what do you do with those numbers? And I think we have a lot more certainty, particularly around like mid-century projections. And even though it still diverges after that, we have a much better understanding of what the sources of those uncertainties are and sort of, a narrowing of that crazy range. So yeah, I learned so much from people, like Anne in Seattle and David
Mm.
Behar and, Alan Cohn in New York and others. So yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like it just selfishly, it was self-serving so I could get access to all these great brains that have been working on these issues long before me. I mean, Tiraso in Tampa, like
Yeah.
the technical work they're doing is just astounding. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Philadelphia is doing leading in some places when it comes to adaptation, but we definitely had places to grow and learn. And so I just felt so lucky to have that connection to everyone in WUCA.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
you didn't learn from us on coastal resilience.
Not for
If you
sea
did,
level
that's
rise.
yeah, things have gotten really bad if
Yeah.
if Arizona is suddenly now a coastal state.
Yeah, yeah. That would be bad.
Connected with that, I something you touched on earlier, which I wanna dive a little bit deeper in, as we talked about how different utilities address issues of climate change, address issues of how climate and climate-related impacts affect their ability to meet their demands of delivering water to their customers. I think one of the things that I noted, certainly when you and Philadelphia Water, the rest of the crew came on board, is I thought it was an interesting model, and you'll tell me a little bit more, which is this idea that you exclusively had essentially a climate change department
Mhm.
within a
Yeah.
water, essentially water city or water utility department. Um, I hadn't seen that before, and of course, part of that is yeah, you guys were a little bit ahead of the curve than others in terms of recognizing the importance of that. But how did that functionally work, right? Because most utilities don't, I mean, at least then, maybe things have changed, weren't so far looking ahead to think about creating such a structure within a water utility. From your experience, or as far as you know, how did that come about and how was that able to sustain? I know you talked, there were some challenges, right? You had hinted. Tell me a little bit more about that. How is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I joined the team after it was formed, so I don't know that I'll get all of the history
Mm,
right,
mm,
but I will say PWD, the Philadelphia Water Department, I think historically, and I think a lot of people here don't know this, but it has been a very progressive utility, and I think has always been sort of, you know, leaders in the space of trying to start that, because we are a wastewater, stormwater, and drinking water utility, really thinking about that sort of one water approach. I think we were one of the few utilities, I wasn't aware of others that were doing like ecological restoration and seeing that as a key part of what they do. We support different networks and opportunities for folks upstream in the watershed. So, like up in the Schuylkill watershed, we are part of a network that creates grant funding to do coal mine restoration because, like, that can impact your water resources. So, I think we've always been sort of on the leading edge and fairly progressive and forward thinking. And so I don't take credit for that, but I think the leaders at PWD really, saw that climate change could have a huge impact on operations and decided to, really invest in creating a team that was dedicated to focusing on it. And I think there's a couple people. I mean, I think there was a deputy director, Chris Crockett. I think he's now with Aqua, but I think it was kind of his sort of, real interest. He was a champion of the issue. And I think timing wise, Julia Rockwell went back to school, I think Duke for resource management, and really phenomenal program there. And I think she did her thesis on climate change and impacts to PWD. And I think it just kind of like this light went off. Like we have this person who worked here that went back to school. They did this great project. We need to think about these things. Like we should start a program. And so they asked her to come back and manage that program. And so I think that's kind of how it started. I think, and we've talked about this in WUCA, how just having a champion is
mm,
such a key part to the work. And as far as the model goes, yeah, I think it was a pretty interesting model. We almost felt like consultants to the rest of the department, right? So we
mm.
would like meet with different teams. And like I mentioned, you have to sort of generalize and understand all about different systems, right? So if we were trying to understand how temperature changes would increase source water temperatures, that has impacts on disinfection byproducts that we're using. And so like I found myself suddenly learning about like chemistry and like all these things, and I couldn't take a deep dive to be an expert in it, but I had to know enough to understand how those climate impacts would affect operations. So, yeah, I think we did a lot of, working across the department, almost in like a consultant fashion, trying to understand their needs and then build tools and provide climate services that would be useful for them.
Yeah. It strikes me that, from what you said, there are several factors that had to have been present to make the creation of such an
Mhm.
entity within the organization amenable, right? So, one, the natural environment or culture has to support, at least be
Mhm.
open to that idea.
Yep.
You got to have folks that can do that type of work or
Hmm.
learn or sort of at least have a step ahead, which is what I've heard. Obviously,
Hmm.
certainly when the team came together. And I guess your biggest ingredient is indeed having a champion to
Hmm.
channel that through. And I'm just sort of paralleling that with my experience, my last days at CAP, and
Hmm.
talk about next steps here in a second. I looked at the model that you guys did, and I thought it was a great idea, and was looking to try to implement that. in the organization. But I was missing the previous two ingredients that would have helped you know
The
the
champion and
the
yeah.
champion. I mean, a champion that was sort of higher up in the organization,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Ourselves, we are champions, right, in terms of moving the work and
Mhm.
advocating and doing it from at least the staff level. But so it really was an inspiration to see that model. But I'm happy to say that at least I was able to eke out a climate adaptation plan before I left,
Yes.
which was
Yes.
just
No, that's no
monumental
small
for
feat.
Arizona, right? Like if you
Yeah.
think about the
Yeah.
politics of the time. Um, so that was your time at Philadelphia, or not all of it, obviously a piece of Philadelphia Water Department. I think we both, and we were chatting about this the other day, we both left our respective roles with our agencies and WUCA, because that was sort of tethered, around the same time. And I think you transitioned to ultimately where you would end up with your current role with the Office of Sustainability. I want to hear a little bit more about, as much as you're willing to share, your motivations on, what made you decide to, well, transition is usually a two-step, right? It's leaving where you were and then
Yeah.
going where you're going, right? Sometimes they're together, but a lot of times
Yeah.
they're not connected. Give me a little bit of more of, as much as you're willing to share, on what prompted that transition, and certainly how and why you ended up at the
Yeah.
sustainability.
Yeah. I think you're similar in that like water resource management will sort of always be like in my heart. Like I'm like a water person. And I still am pretty obsessed and like interested in sea level rise and how we are going to address these coastal impacts that we all face. So while I'm very water focused, and even still today, my role is still focused a lot on water, specifically with flooding. But at the water department, they have their own water fee. So it's like separate from and a whole separate fund from the general fund. So they have their own sort of revenue source. And with that, there's a very clear definition of what they can and cannot work on, right? It has to be tied to their mission. And so I think I kept running into frustration with really being told to like stay in my lane and, we can do this risk assessment for one facility on the coast, but what about the neighborhood right beside it? What about the other city-owned municipal assets that are right beside it? Like I'm a big systems, big picture person. And so I kept wanting to sort of go bigger. And I think particularly with sea level rise, it really actually should be a regional approach, right? Like that water is, you're impacted by all the land around you, upstream, downstream. You're impacted by what adaptation solutions
Mm.
people downstream and upstream are going to do. I'm interested in social justice as well. And so I think I saw this real gap in trying to address some of the vulnerability at the community level. We didn't really, other than the Office of Sustainability, we do have a flood risk management task force that brings together different departments to think about that. But, the Office of Sustainability was really the one that was starting to pick up and fill that gap of neighborhood vulnerability. And so that really interested me. I thought Salim Chapman, who was the chief resilience officer at the time, was doing a really great job in growing the team and sort of coming up with a new direction for the resilience team. And so, yeah, I think I reached out to him being like, hey, would love to learn more about the office. I'd love to, just kind of planting a seed. And yeah, that just led to connecting. And he thought of me when they had a specific role that was opening up. I also have to be honest, like the organizational structure at PWD, I was working with all these phenomenal people who are very committed to the water department, and there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for like upward growth. It gets harder and harder the longer you're there. You're kind of, competing for very few management roles. I was excited by the work in the Office of Sustainability, and it felt like a really good step in the right direction to sort of, be an advancement in my career as well.
I think we shared that sentiment. I mean,
Yeah.
both of our journeys kind of went in
Hmm.
parallel in an interesting way, where I think we did all we could in the environments that we're at,
Yep.
and for us to
Hmm.
do more, we had to,
Yep.
make a change, and it's tough. It's a transition point for a lot of people with careers, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
It's a tug and pull from, being comfortable where you are, and especially if you like
Hmm.
working with the people, that's a tough one, right? It's easier to
Yeah.
make a transition if you don't like the work or
Yep.
there's issues with people, but if you do, but you
Hmm.
still,
Yeah.
kind of hit the wall in a sense of progression, it's a difficult choice. But from my view, I think it worked out for you. I'm just
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in my dream job right now. So yeah.
amazing. I'm going completely off script. I have this very linear in my head. I'm going to jump a little bit over the place. I'm going to take you way back now, even
Okay.
before WUCA, even before
Okay.
Philadelphia Water Department. Um, I know that you got your bachelor's in essentially fine arts.
Hmm.
And if we have done our research correctly, and if memory serves me, it involved ceramics and photography. Is that correct? And I
Yes.
do recall, among the many times we would sort of have our social gatherings, post our meetings in our
Hmm.
WUCA convenings. Um, at the time, I don't know if it's still the case. Maybe you're too busy now.
Hmm.
But you also cultivated your interest and passion for arts as a sort of a venture, if you will, in terms of creating art-related things. I'm sorry, my knowledge in the arts is quite limited, so if this sounds
You're good.
improperly named, please forgive me. I think art is a great balance to sort of calming our mind when we switch gears from all this technical and
Yeah.
detailed things. But the big question for me, knowing that, how did you go from that to this world of water and
Yeah.
climate? That's a very big leap. So tell me your journey of how that happened.
Sure. I don't know if this will resonate with listeners or not, but I think I have a very non-traditional path. And, I meet these people who went to school in undergrad in something, and then they immediately went to grad school, and they maybe went on and got their PhD, and they've always been focused in this one area, and they've kind of known what they want to do. And that's very intimidating to me because I feel like I've been all over the place. I think just naturally growing up, I excelled more in the arts. I mean, I also loved science. So, science and the arts, I did musical theater. Like, I was a nerd. I think in college, I actually started off as an anthropology major, but then just like kept finding that I really excelled in the art space. So, that's where I switched back to being an art major. My BFA is technically in photography, and I did a lot of ceramics when I was there. And I've continued to do ceramics since then. Definitely has slowed down now that I have a kid.
Mm.
But yeah, how did I get from there to, yeah, working in
If
more environmental
if you had
science?
said anthropology, I was like, okay, that's sort of a closer
Yeah,
intermediate step,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I grew up in a really small town in, kind of central PA, and in grad school, I just didn't want to come back home for the summers. I wanted something else. I wanted an adventure. And so I actually started working on boats up in Alaska.
Hmm.
And I just thought it seemed cool. So I worked on essentially whale watching boats, and
Wow.
I was working in the Seward, Alaska, which is right outside of Kenai Fjords National Park. So it's this amazing national park where you have these tidewater glaciers that are calving off into the ocean with like, bears up on the hills and whales jumping out of the water. I mean, I'm an East Coast girl, and this place just blew my mind, and I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with like the coastal ecosystem. And um, I think that's when I first got really interested in sort of coastal systems and fisheries and how the whole ecosystem works. Not long after, I remember like Hurricane Katrina hit, and like I started becoming much more aware of climate change. And I moved back to the East Coast. I worked in science museums for a number of years. And then I went back to school and decided to study resource management with a focus on coastal systems. And um, again, I had this arts undergraduate degree. I had taken some prerequisites, but I found this international program that was very interdisciplinary. So like I had met all the requirements of what you needed for science and all of that. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It's a program out of Iceland. So it's part of the University of Akureyri, but it's in the West Fjords. It's like a satellite campus in this extremely remote place. And it was like the best year of my life. It was so fascinating. I loved it there. And that really kind of changed, yeah, the course of what I was doing in my life. So ultimately did move back to Philadelphia and became interested in what the water utility was doing at the time because they were just launching their Green City Clean Waters program, which is a citywide program to use green stormwater infrastructure as like the primary tool for addressing extreme precipitation and runoff and trying to reduce combined sewer overflows. And I just thought that was so cool that a utility was taking this sort of progressive look at how to solve this, pollution issue, but using greening as a tool and trying to get, again, thinking of it as like an ecosystem, turn the city back into an ecosystem that can absorb water and sort of use that resource rather than having it just run off into the pipes that we have to then manually clean or have overflow into our rivers and creeks.
Is that what sort of led to you joining Philadelphia Water Department? That interest?
Yes. Yes. And I first joined, I actually was part of the public engagement team
Mm.
and was doing planning and public engagement around green stormwater infrastructure. And I did that role for about 2 years. And I loved, I was like, I found my place. I love the water utility. I really loved the engagement team, but I felt that I was becoming an expert in like the community organizations and the neighborhoods where I was doing outreach rather than like an expert on the sort of environmental issues. And so I think one of the great things about PWD, I don't know if CAP was like this, but if you let people know that you want to stay, you're committed, but you're interested in something slightly different, there's a lot of sort of lateral mobility. And I think the leaders have always been really supportive of making people want to find like what's the right fit for them. So, yeah, I really credit, I think I had overlapped a little bit with Mark Camerata. And I think when the climate change team was expanding, he was like, hey, you said you've been wanting to do more environmental science work. I had this sort of focus on coastal systems, and they were looking for somebody to sort of take over doing that coastal resilience work. So, yeah, that's my lucky, weird trajectory to get to
That's
where I am
amazing.
today.
That's incredible. So your sort of water climate origin story, I mean,
Hmm.
each of those could be an episode. Your time in Alaska and
Yeah.
Iceland. I mean, you kind of blew through that, but you gave us a flavor. I
Hmm.
would love to hear more. But talk to me, so we've covered your track until sort of almost present day of your time with the
Hmm.
Office of Sustainability. And personally, the question I want to ask you from your perspective of kind of going through your career and all of those twists and turns and being able to sort of leverage your experience and sort of making the right move. Sometimes that happens with opportunity and luck and circumstance. Um, what did you personally sort of find challenging as you're navigating this, like from a career perspective? When people see you, right? If they see
Yeah.
you now, they see you as, Chief Resilience
Mhm.
Officer, and the
Yeah.
title carries an image, right? And people
Hmm.
think that happens overnight. Clearly not, based on everything
Yeah.
we've talked about. But even then, there are other
Hmm.
challenges that, sort of quiet struggles or challenges that each of us face to kind of get where we are. And
Hmm.
as much as you're comfortable with, what are some of the things that you may have dealt with or struggled with, or things that you had to uh, sort of address or tackle in your ability to sort of navigate your career?
I think it took a while to find my place at PWD, and while I felt like I really liked the organization and the people I was working with. I mean, that was a hard decision. The public engagement team, there's this woman who was leading deputy director of, the engagement and communication side, Joanne Dom. She was just amazing. Sometimes what makes your job meaningful is the people you're working with and those relationships. And so that was hard. I think because I have such a weird trajectory and I didn't go to school for engineering and then get my PhD in engineering, and I'm working at a water utility surrounded by people that was often their trajectory. I think there could, be feelings of being an imposter, imposter syndrome. I mean, if we're being honest, like, our team, our climate adaptation program team, we're three women that were leading this work in climate and trying to create design guidelines for the department and trying to meet with all these operations folks. It's a lot of older men that had been there for a long time. I think, I think there were struggles with being taken seriously. I'd say most people are very respectful, but I think that, those are real things that can challenge how the work plays out, right? I think my time at PWD, I can't say enough. I think people were supportive and wonderful. I think it's been a real shift joining the Office of Sustainability. Also have fantastic colleagues and great leadership, but we don't have the resources. PWD had enough funding to hire people full time to work on that. There was fantastic consultant support with one consultant in particular, CDM Smith, did a lot of work to grow the climate program. It's almost like we're trying to go from doing it at the utility. I'm trying to advance this work citywide, and yet I have like very little resources to do it. And so that's been a real struggle. And also, every time, the leadership changes in the city, there's new priorities. And so that can be really challenging, trying to just figure out where your work plugs into the new priorities and figuring out how to frame your work so that people understand the importance. And the last challenge I think I'll highlight is just the, lack of resources, lack of funding to implement anything, right? But I also think there's governance challenges. Like, we're a separate department from the planning department. We do a lot of very similar things to our Office of Emergency Management that, they do our hazard mitigation plan. So I think just defining the roles and figuring out how we align and support each other rather than, just making sure we're not duplicating efforts has been, that's a challenge as well.
I mean, the political structure in a,
Yep.
city or state or even a federal has
Hmm.
implications. But when you're working directly for the city,
Yeah.
changes there reverberate a lot more closely to the
Hmm.
work you do, as probably slightly less so
Yep.
with the department. And that makes things challenging, I imagine,
Hmm.
in terms of, going on a trajectory and then having to adjust or redirect because of some type of political reverberation
Yep.
that affects the work that you do. So I can
Yeah.
certainly empathize with that.
Hmm.
So now, Office of Sustainability, very
Hmm.
proud of you, by the way, of just where you are in your career, just personally, obviously cheering you on. Tell me a little bit more about, you've hinted on it from the challenge perspective, but kind of the work that you do and really what your particular motivations, not just obviously for the role and what you're responsible for, but for the office itself, or like what are the things that you would like to see done in terms of plans and objectives that are things that you kind of want to leave your mark on with the work that you're doing there?
There's 7 people on the climate team, the climate resilience team. So we're the division of climate resilience, and we really think about our work. The metaphor we often use is like nested Russian dolls. we do work at different scales and we use sort of different entry points for that work, whether it's policy or trying to support infrastructure changes. So I guess I'll start citywide first. So I lead a lot of the sort of citywide planning, trying to, do some interagency coordination because there is a lot of fantastic work happening across departments, and we want to support that and also make sure it's all aligned and coordinated. So a lot of that is the work that I do. Also try to create those climate services where we're providing the risk information that people need, embedding climate into existing processes. Like there's somebody on my team who developed this phenomenal tool. I wanted a tool where we could sort of screen all of the capital planning requests that are made in the city and just flag ones that are vulnerable, not to say that they shouldn't be funded, but just to say, here are some considerations you should make if you're updating that HVAC system and you're in the floodplain, like make sure it's on the roof and not down in the basement, things like that. So slowly we've been trying to, embed resilience into processes across the city. And then a big thing that we're doing, and something I would highlight right now, is we're updating the city's resilience plan. We've been working for several years with consultants to downscale the climate projections for Philadelphia, summarize, the observations that we see, where we're headed. We're providing guidance on like how to choose which projection based on your risk tolerance and things of that nature. So we're updating the climate science, we're updating citywide vulnerability assessments, focused mainly on heat and flooding because those are our two biggest hazards. And then we're updating a resilience plan that's really going to be a roadmap to help us sort of think about how to prioritize investments and what policy interventions should we be taking. So we just kicked off a public engagement process citywide. We're working with an ambassador program with 18 different organizations where we give them stipends and they're going to co-host workshops with us all across the city. We launched a climate resilience youth council where we're working with high schoolers to get their input into the plan. We have an art and poetry competition coming up. And then we'll do a second round of engagement where we'll do a deep dive into frontline communities to get more feedback and workshopping with them, just to make sure their voices are included. We also are trying to do a cost of inaction study that can be part of that. So a lot of work happening right now to pull together this plan that should hopefully drive investments and focus moving forward. And then that's sort of the citywide level. The next Russian doll is focused on, there's sort of two programs, one focused on flooding and one focused on heat. And so, doing a lot of interagency coordination, really taking a deep dive. We have a flood risk management task force that we manage. The flood resilience program also just got Philadelphia entered into FEMA's community rating system, which gives people discounts on their flood insurance premiums. We have a working group to try to update floodplain regulations, and we split floodplain regulatory, the obligations that we have with license and inspection. So there's some compliance pieces to that role as well. And then we do place-based work. And I think this is a really amazing model where we actually go into frontline communities and work for years trying to build the capacity of community groups in those neighborhoods to sort of co-produce the solutions and think about the interventions that they want to see. So we're working in two frontline communities, one called Eastwick on flooding and one called Strawberry Mansion on heat. And maybe I'll leave it there, but those are kind of the work areas. And I think looking forward, I'd really love to expand that place-based program. Getting the climate resilience plan finalized, it's about a year and a half away, is like, I've been working on it for years. So excited to have, some of those big reports that are coming out soon. And the last thing I'll highlight, I'm excited about a project with the Department of Energy. We've been selected as one of two locations where DOE is going to sort of throw a bunch of resources towards building a digital twin of the city, or we're calling it a digital test bed. And the idea is to really throw these incredible models that the national labs have developed and the computing power and the AI, like all the latest and greatest in AI towards looking at our risk and really around the water and energy nexus. So excited to see how that project shapes up over the next few years as well.
Amazing. I was waiting for another doll. You
Just the
said it was
three main
plenty.
dolls. Yep.
It's a preset number of dolls. I mean, maybe they
Yes.
multiply, right? Because
Yes.
as they say, the reward for good work is more work. So obviously,
Yep.
probably what you're doing, the results and outputs that you're generating could lead to other developments, right? It's not
Yep.
a finite thing.
Yep.
Well, you've sort of given me a plug of some of the things you're doing. Was there, although I didn't specifically ask the question, is there something notable, obviously beyond all those great things that are going on, that you yourself want to further highlight as something major that was done, something that's coming on the horizon, or something that's in active engagement at the moment?
I kind of hit the big things that we're working on recently. I guess I would give, there's the place-based team, that sort of the inner doll in the
Mhm.
Russian dolls, I help with that, but they just do the work and run, and they're phenomenal, the group that's working on the place-based initiatives. And I really think it's just an amazing model where, every grant we apply to, we make sure we're re-granting funds to these community groups. I think it's just a really impactful program. And so I would give all the credit to Corinne Tangtricol, who leads that program. Taylor Quinlan works in Eastwick on the flooding, and Andrew Dodd works in Strawberry Mansion. Just like really interesting model that's been very successful. Um, and I think a lot of it does have to do with, just like who they are as people. They're just very thoughtful people that are connecting these climate issues to other quality of life issues, and really not just like checking the box that they did engagement, but working for years in one community to make an impact and build that trust that has been eroded for so many reasons. They're doing incredible work, and it's been really just touching to see these communities come together to really co-produce the solutions with us. So there's a big flood resilience strategy that's about to be published for that neighborhood of Eastwick. And we're working with the Army Corps on installing a levee long-term, but we also have short-term solutions like HESCO barriers that should be in the ground in the next year and a half. There's just a lot of really phenomenal work happening on my team. Like I'm just an incredible team. So
You're very, very busy, is what I'm
yes.
is what I'm hearing. So
Yes.
extra grateful
Yep.
to for you to give us your time. Before we end, that would have been my last question, but I really want to end on a more introspective note. And I'm kind of pulling the threads on some of the major things that you've been working on for the breadth of your career. I like the thread of how you started sort of at the community level and working with populations and folks that are closer to the ground on the actual type of technical and larger work that you do, and then transitioning to uh, sort of a not necessarily, as you said it, a full-on deep expert, but a jack of all trades, if you will, type of
Mhm.
expert, at least in the area related to the
Yep.
interface of climate and water, to now taking on, and that started a little bit earlier as well, taking on lead roles as now directing folks as
Mhm.
part of big strategic operations and activities. Going through that journey and through those evolutions, what is a sort of either a mantra that sort of helped navigate you, or piece of wisdom or advice that you would impart for someone that, everyone's path is different, right? As you said,
Yeah.
yours was just like me and my questions all over the place, but it got
Mhm.
it seems structured. It seems structured. Someone looking and saying, "Hey, not necessarily to emulate the path that you took, but interested in the type of things. Maybe they're more interested in community work. Maybe they're more interested to sort of be a generalist in this area or to develop an
Yeah.
expertise, or maybe ultimately to hopefully be a leader in this space or this broad space." What's sort of been your motivation or the thing that's driven you? And or based on that, what is sort of a wisdom that you would impart on others?
I don't know that I have one mantra. Um,
You may have several. That's great. It's a team of mantras.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think for me and seeing my weird trajectory, I think I've just tried to follow my heart and what really interests me. And I'm not gonna lie, like I have a 5-year-old, and sometimes I'm like, I'm spread so thin. I don't know that the dials are right. And like, I wish I had more time with my son. So, I think you just have to understand what you value in life and really find what gets you inspired. And I think if you do want to do public service, which has been extremely fulfilling I mean, extremely frustrating and extremely fulfilling. I'll just say, I think change is very slow, but when you do make change, I feel like it has a really big impact. And so for me, I like that type of work. I think some people are much better suited for like working for an engineering firm and they want to just like dive into a task and complete it and feel great and, go on to the next thing. I think figuring out what really fulfills you and then finding the work that fills your cup. I guess that's my mantra. Find what fills your cup. For me,
that's
it was water. So,
literally and figuratively, maybe.
yes, yes.
Well, I couldn't have ended that on a more perfect note. I think that really is a beautiful message and really sums up in a way your experience and hopefully others will take that sage advice
Yep.
and in their own way find how they can contribute, right?
Yeah.
So Abby, I really, really, really appreciate your time. It's always lovely to chat with you. I wish we could do this in person at some
I
point.
know, yes.
It would be great to catch up in person, but very, very grateful for your time and sharing with us some of the things that you're doing and explaining a little bit of your journey,
Yeah,
which could be a motivation for others that don't necessarily have it so linearly mapped.
good. I hope so. And I mean, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. This has been just really, really great to connect again.